Turn. Paramount didn't want Al Pacino at all. It's hard to imagine The Godfather without Al Pacino's intense eyes and quiet, simmering rage as Michael Corleone. But believe it or not, Paramount Pictures fought tooth and nail against his casting. When Francis Ford Coppola first suggested Pacino, studio executives flat out rejected him. They wanted a big star, someone like Robert Redford or Ryan O'Neal, anyone who looked more like a golden boy war hero than a brooding Italian son. Pacino was a theater actor from New York with almost no film experience. To studio heads, he was too short, too unknown, and too ethnic. Coppola, however, had a vision. He saw in Pacino a dangerous stillness, a young man who could transform from innocent college kid to ruthless mafia boss with terrifying believability. The director fought the studio for months, even risking being fired. Executives tested other actors, including Martin Sheen and James Caan, for the lead, but Coppola refused to give up. When filming finally began, Pacino's early scenes didn't convince Paramount. They called his performance sleepy and threatened to replace him mid-production. But then came the iconic restaurant assassination scene. Pacino's cold-blooded calm before pulling the trigger in Louis' restaurant was electric. It was the moment that silenced every critic in the studio. Coppola later said that when Pacino fired that gun, the movie itself came alive. From that point on, The Godfather wasn't just a mob film. It was a myth in motion. Pacino's transformation mirrored Michael's own. Underestimated, dismissed, and finally unstoppable. Ironically, Paramount's least wanted actor went on to become the defining face of one of the greatest films ever made, and earned an Oscar nomination for it. Pacino would later say that filming The Godfather felt like being in the middle of a storm. One wrong move, and you were out. I didn't even think I'd last to the end of the shoot. But he did, and that gamble made cinematic history. Sucker 9. Marlon Brando's unbelievable audition that shocked Hollywood. Marlon Brando was already a legend by the early 70s, but also a nightmare for studios. He had a reputation for being impossible to work with, demanding, and unpredictable. Paramount executives swore they would never hire him. They called him box office poison. Yet Francis Ford Coppola knew there was only one man who could embody Don Vito Corleone, the weary, wise, yet fearsome patriarch of the Corleone family. The studio refused to even meet Brando unless Coppola agreed to 3 conditions. Brando must take a huge pay cut. He must do a screen test. He must post a bond to guarantee good behavior. For a star of Brando's stature, these demands were humiliating. But Coppola secretly arranged an audition in Brando's own home to prove everyone wrong. On that morning, Brando arrived on set in a robe, tied his long hair into a ponytail, stuffed tissues into his cheeks, and painted his face with shoe polish to age himself. Then he looked in the mirror, lowered his voice, and murmured, "I'm Vito Corleone." Coppola filmed this transformation on a handheld camera and sent the footage to Paramount. The moment the executives saw Brando's new face, the heavy jowls, the soft, rasping speech, they were stunned into silence. The man who had once been Stanley Kowalski in a streetcar named Desire had disappeared. In his place stood a mafia don who could command both fear and respect. Even then, getting him signed wasn't easy. Brando was paid only $50,000, an insult compared to his fame, but Coppola knew the film would be nothing without him, and Brando didn't just act the part, he lived it. On set, he kept cotton balls in his mouth to maintain the Don's swollen jaw look, used cue cards hidden around the set so his dialogue felt more spontaneous, and improvised lines that became immortal. That famous line, "I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse," was delivered so softly it made the threat more chilling. Brando's portrayal gave the mafia boss a tragic dignity, turning crime into opera and the Don into a kind of American King Lear. Critics called it the performance of a lifetime, and it won him the Academy Award for Best Actor. Yet, in true Brando fashion, he didn't show up to accept it. Instead, he sent a Native American activist named Sachin Littlefeather to reject the Oscar on his behalf, protesting Hollywood's mistreatment of indigenous people. The stunned audience booed, clapped, and gasped, exactly the kind of chaos Brando seemed to thrive on. Behind the scenes, Brando's presence transformed everyone around him. Young actors like Pacino and Robert Duvall watched him with awe. He could switch from joking to terrifying in a heartbeat. Coppola later recalled, "When Marlon walked on set, everyone's energy changed. He wasn't just playing the Don, he was the Don." Brando's ability to channel authority and sorrow in a single glance gave The Godfather its emotional spine. Without him, the story of crime and loyalty would have lacked its Shakespearean weight. As one critic put it, Brando didn't act in The Godfather, he haunted it. The studio thought Coppola was crazy for filming it so dark. When The Godfather was first screened for Paramount executives, they were furious. Not because of the acting, not because of the script, but because they could barely see what was happening. The film was too dark. Literally. The cinematographer, Gordon Willis, had used deep shadows, dim lighting, and heavy contrast to create the look that would later define the movie. But in 1971, it looked like a disaster to studio executives used to brightly lit Hollywood sets. They accused Willis and Coppola of ruining the footage. One executive even demanded, "Why can't I see their faces?" But Willis, who would later be nicknamed the Prince of Darkness, was crafting something revolutionary. He wanted the lighting itself to feel like a character. The Corleone world was shadowed, secretive, and built on hidden deals. If you could see every face clearly, you'd miss the fear, the tension, the moral decay. The darkness wasn't a mistake, it was storytelling. Willis famously said, "If a man's going to kill someone, he doesn't do it under a spotlight." Coppola backed him completely, though it nearly cost him his job. The studio constantly sent notes demanding more light and even sent a representative to the set to monitor the next day's shots. Coppola ignored them. Together, he and Willis used minimal lighting sources, table lamps, window light, and candles, creating a world that looked like it was illuminated by crime itself. That stylistic choice became legendary. The dim, amber tones gave The Godfather its painterly beauty, evoking Renaissance art and the chiaroscuro of Caravaggio. It made violence look tragic instead of sensational. In the wedding scene at the beginning, the bright sunlight outside contrasts sharply with the shadowy interior of Don Corleone's office, symbolizing the split between the public life of the family and their dark, private empire. Ironically, the very thing executives hated most became the most copied visual style in cinema. Every gangster movie, from Scarface to Goodfellas, owes a visual debt to The Godfather's darkness. As Al Pacino once joked, they called it too dark. Now every film school teaches that lighting is art. Willis went on to work with Woody Allen on Annie Hall in Manhattan, where his mastery of light turned black and white film into pure emotion. But it was The Godfather that made his reputation and changed how audiences saw light and shadow forever. Year 7. The real Mafia tried to stop the movie. It might sound like an urban legend, but it's true. The real Mafia didn't want The Godfather made. In 1970, while pre-production was underway, Italian-American organizations protested the film, accusing it of promoting harmful stereotypes. But behind the scenes, actual members of the mob were paying attention, and they weren't happy either. A powerful figure named Joseph Colombo, head of the Colombo crime family, took personal offense. He was also the founder of the Italian-American Civil Rights League, which claimed that the word mafia was being used to smear their community. His group threatened boycotts, lawsuits, and even violence. Paramount offices were flooded with angry letters and phone calls. Some of the calls, however, came with veiled threats, people whispering that accidents can happen. The tension grew so bad that Paramount executives started receiving personal death threats. Producer Al Ruddy even found his car windows shot out one morning. He later said, "It wasn't a joke. We were being watched. At one point, filming seemed impossible. That's when Ruddy decided to meet Colombo directly. The meeting took place in New York's Park Sheraton Hotel. Surrounded by Colombo's bodyguards, Ruddy promised that the word Mafia would never appear in the script, and he kept that promise. There is not a single mention of Mafia or Cosa Nostra in the entire movie. Once Colombo approved, the protests mysteriously stopped. In fact, many mob members became fans. Some even visited the set. Rumor has it that real gangsters acted as extras in the wedding scene and coached actors on how to talk and move like made men. Richard Castellano, who played Clemenza, was reportedly advised by actual mobsters on how to kiss the Don's hand properly. The line between reality and fiction blurred completely. Ironically, after the film's release, mobsters started quoting The Godfather like scripture. FBI wiretaps recorded real-life criminals using phrases from the movie in their conversations, terms like going to the mattresses or making offers. It became part of mob culture itself. What started as a film about organized crime ended up influencing the way organized crime spoke. Years later, Francis Ford Coppola admitted that, while the threats were real, he found it fascinating how the film was embraced by those it depicted. "We thought they'd hate us," he said. "Instead, they treated the movie like a mirror." But not everyone was thrilled. The FBI later complained that The Godfather glamorized the Mafia, giving it an aura of sophistication it didn't deserve. Critics argued it romanticized murder and betrayal. Yet Coppola always insisted it wasn't about gangsters. It was about America, about capitalism, about power disguised as respectability. "The Mafia," he said, "is the metaphor." Still, it's chilling to think that at one point, The Godfather, now considered a masterpiece, was nearly killed before it was even born, not by critics or executives, but by the very criminals it depicted. 6. The cat in Don Corleone's lap was never in the script. In one of the most unforgettable opening scenes in film history, Don Vito Corleone sits in his shadowy office during his daughter's wedding, stroking a calm, purring cat while casually deciding the fate of men. That cat became an icon of power and menace, yet it wasn't supposed to be there at all. It wasn't even in the script. On the morning they filmed that scene, Francis Ford Coppola found a stray cat wandering around the Paramount lot. Without saying a word to anyone, he picked it up and handed it to Marlon Brando just before the cameras rolled. Brando immediately began petting the cat as if it belonged there, his gentle strokes contrasting perfectly with the ruthless words coming out of his mouth. It turned a chilling scene into something almost tender, the perfect symbol of Don Corleone's paradox, a man who could show affection while ordering violence. But the improvisation came with an unexpected problem. The cat purred so loudly that it nearly ruined the audio. The sound engineers had to work overtime to clean up Brando's dialogue, which was almost drowned out by the animal's rumbling contentment. Coppola later laughed about it, saying, "That cat was the loudest actor on set." Despite the chaos it caused, the cat stayed in the final cut because Brando's natural handling of it made the scene unforgettable. It gave the Don a godlike calm, a man at peace in his own kingdom, even as others begged for mercy at his feet. That small, unscripted detail helped define the Corleone character far more than any line of dialogue could. It also fit perfectly with Brando's method of finding truth in the smallest gestures. He believed characters were defined not by what they said, but by what they did when no one was watching. Stroking a cat while deciding life or death. That was Brando's quiet genius. The image has since been copied endlessly in pop culture. From Austin Powers' Dr. Evil to Breaking Bad, as Gus Fring, all tracing back to a stray cat that wandered into film history. 5. The horse head scene was shockingly real. Few scenes in movie history have caused more gasps, screams, and lifelong trauma than the infamous horsehead scene. Hollywood producer Jack Woltz wakes up in his silk bed, pulls back the sheets, and finds the severed head of his prized racehorse staring at him. It's horrifying, unforgettable, and, incredibly, it was real. No, not the murder part. But the horse's head? 100% real. The original plan was to use a fake prop head, but when Coppola saw the studio's version, he thought it looked cheap, plastic, lifeless, unconvincing. He wanted audiences to feel the shock, not just see it. So, the production team contacted a local dog food company which provided a real horse head from an animal that had already been processed for other purposes. When actor John Marley, who played Waltz, was told about it, he assumed it would still be fake. So, when they rolled cameras and he pulled back the sheets, his scream of horror wasn't acting. It was genuine. He was looking straight into the bloodied eyes of a real horse. Coppola kept that take. He said, "You can't fake that kind of reaction." The result became one of the most talked-about moments in film history. It was grotesque, unforgettable, and strangely poetic. It wasn't just about shock value. It was about sending a message of power. The Corleone family didn't argue. They didn't threaten twice. They acted. That scene defined the film's sense of inevitability. Once the Don decided something, it was already done. Coppola defended the decision later, saying it was necessary to show the brutal consequences of crossing the Corleones. "People talk about the violence," he said, "but The Godfather isn't about violence, it's about consequence." The audience reaction in 1972 was explosive. Some theaters reported people fainting or running out of the room. Critics called it barbaric but brilliant. Even decades later, the scene still ranks among the most shocking in cinema. But for all its horror, it perfectly encapsulated the film's tone. Elegant, restrained, but deadly when provoked. And here's a bit of irony. Animal rights activists later protested the use of the real head, but Coppola pointed out that no animal was killed for the film. Still, it set off an ethical debate that changed how filmmakers handled realism. Modern movies rely on CGI and prosthetics for scenes like that, but nothing since has ever matched the raw, disturbing authenticity of that moment. Behind the camera, Al Ruddy, the film's producer, admitted that even he was disturbed when he saw the head for the first time. He told Coppola, "You know, you just traumatized half of America." Coppola replied, "Good, they'll remember it." And they did. The image of that silk bed soaked in blood became part of cinematic mythology, a gruesome warning from the Corleones that respect was not optional. Year Cavour, the wedding scene. Took 4 days and over 700 extras. The film opens not with gunfire or bloodshed, but with a wedding. Connie Corleone's wedding is a bright, bustling celebration filled with laughter, dancing, and the haunting contrast of business being conducted in the shadows. It's one of the most iconic openings in cinema history. But behind the scenes, it was chaos. Francis Ford Coppola wanted this wedding to feel authentic, not like a Hollywood set, but like a real Italian-American celebration. So he turned a section of Staten Island into the Corleone estate and filled it with real people. Over 700 extras were brought in, including friends, families, and even locals from Italian neighborhoods. They were told to eat, drink, dance, gossip, anything that made the moment feel alive. Filming lasted 4 straight days, and it felt like an actual wedding. There was real food, real music, and real exhaustion. Coppola encouraged improvisation, allowing the actors to interact naturally. The musicians actually played live, the dancers actually got tipsy, and the laughter you hear wasn't scripted. It was genuine joy. But what really made the scene powerful wasn't just the energy. It was the juxtaposition. Inside the dark office, Don Corleone is granting favors, conducting business, deciding justice. Outside, sunlight pours over children and champagne glasses. 2 worlds, one sacred, one corrupt, both ruled by family loyalty. That duality became the moral spine of the film. For the actors, the wedding served another purpose. It bonded them. Coppola used it as a sort of rehearsal party, forcing the cast to spend hours together so they could develop real chemistry. James Caan, Sonny, Talia Shire, Connie, and John Cazale, Fredo, began to act like real siblings, teasing each other between takes. Marlon Brando played with the extras' kids, feeding them cake between shots. By the time cameras moved indoors, the cast already felt like a family. That's why the wedding scene feels so natural. It wasn't acting, it was immersion, and Coppola's decision to shoot it like a documentary, moving the camera as though it were an uninvited guest at the party, added realism that no stage direction could replicate. Ironically, studio executives hated it at first. They called it too long, too slow, and unnecessary. They wanted it shortened dramatically. Coppola fought back again. He insisted that the wedding wasn't just an introduction, it was the world. It set the rules of the Corleone universe: loyalty, family, respect, and the unspoken price of every favor. When the movie premiered, audiences didn't just watch that scene, they lived in it. It drew them in so deeply that by the time Michael appears, shy and smiling, you already feel like you know these people. You're part of the family. And that's exactly what made everything that followed so devastating. 3. Al Pacino's transformation scene was almost cut. One of the most gripping moments in The Godfather comes halfway through the film, when Michael Corleone, the quiet son who swore never to join the family business, calmly assassinates Solozzo and Captain McCluskey in a small Italian restaurant. That moment marks the end of Michael E.'s innocence, and the birth of the Don he was destined to become. But that scene, now considered one of the greatest in film history, almost didn't make it into the movie. Paramount executives hated the idea. They said it was too slow, too quiet, and too risky. They didn't think audiences would sit through minutes of silence while Michael prepared to kill. But Coppola knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted the tension to feel unbearable, the kind of silence that hums in your bones. In that scene, everything depends on pacing. Michael excuses himself, retrieves the gun hidden in the bathroom, and returns to the table. The camera lingers on his face. No dialogue, just the faint sound of a passing train growing louder and louder. That sound was Coppola's masterstroke. It mirrored the chaos inside Michael's head, the violence building beneath his calm expression. Al Pacino later said that during filming, he was terrified of being fired. He thought this scene would be his last. But Coppola kept pushing him to go smaller, quieter, more internal. "Don't show it," he told him. "Let us feel it." When Pacino finally fired those 2 shots, his expression barely changed, but the audience changed forever. After that, there was no going back. Michael wasn't just Don Vito's son anymore. He was the heir, the cold, calculating version of everything his father had tried to protect him from. The irony: the scene that executives wanted to cut became the film's turning point. Critics later called it a masterclass in tension. It redefined how violence could be portrayed, not through chaos, but through stillness. Even the way it was shot was revolutionary. Coppola used long takes instead of quick cuts, forcing the audience to stay trapped with Michael in real time. You could almost hear his heartbeat. Gordon Willis dimmed the lights so much that the actor's eyes became the only visible emotion. Every tiny gesture, the flick of a cigarette, the tap of a gun, felt monumental. The scene's aftermath was just as powerful. Michael's flight to Sicily and the haunting calm that follows made him both sympathetic and terrifying. Audiences didn't just watch a character change. They felt like they witnessed a man's soul fracture. Years later, filmmakers like Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino cited that restaurant scene as a direct influence. It proved that suspense didn't require explosions. It required patience, silence, and truth. Coppola once said, "That's the moment the audience realizes who Michael really is. He doesn't choose the life chooses him." And that's the essence of The Godfather. Destiny disguised as choice, morality dissolving into necessity. 2. The famous line, "Leave the gun, take the cannoli," was improvised. Some of the most iconic lines in film history weren't written in any script, and this one might be the best example. During the scene where Clemenza and his associate execute Paulie Gatto in the car, Clemenza calmly gets out, checks the body, and says to his partner, "Leave the gun, take the cannoli." It's dark, casual, and chillingly funny all at once. But here's the secret. That line wasn't in the script at all. The original dialogue ended with just, "Leave the gun." Richard Castellano, the actor playing Clemenza, improvised the second part on the spot. He added, "Take the cannoli," because earlier in the film, his wife had reminded him to bring dessert home. Castellano, who came from an Italian-American family in New York, wanted to add something that made Clemenza feel real, someone who could commit murder in one breath and remember dessert in the next. Coppola loved it so much he kept it in. And that one improvised moment captured the perfect mix of everyday life and deadly business that defined The Godfather. It showed how violence and domestic life coexisted seamlessly in the Corleone world. Murder wasn't dramatic. It was routine, even polite. The phrase became an instant classic, quoted in pop culture for decades. It appears on T-shirts, parodies, and even menus at Italian restaurants. It's also one of the best examples of The Godfather's unique tone, part tragedy, part dark comedy, entirely unforgettable. Richard Castellano's delivery made it legendary. He doesn't look shocked or even disturbed. He's calm, slightly annoyed, as if the execution was just another chore. That's the brilliance of it, the casualness of evil. It's funny, but it's also frightening. Years later, Coppola said that small, unscripted touches like this gave The Godfather its soul. "It wasn't about lines," he said. "It was about moments where the audience believed these people were real." The irony is that Castellano himself had conflicts with the studio later on and refused to return for The Godfather Part 2 due to disagreements over creative control. But even though he never appeared again, one single improvised sentence ensured his place in cinematic immortality. "Leave the gun, take the cannoli." Simple, perfect, a whole universe in 5 words. Number 1. The Godfather changed Hollywood forever. When The Godfather premiered in March 1972, nobody, not even Coppola, expected what would happen next. The film shattered box office records, becoming the highest-grossing movie of all time at that point. Critics were stunned, audiences were obsessed, and Hollywood would never be the same again. Before The Godfather, gangster films were cheap genre pictures, fast, violent, and morally obvious. After The Godfather, they became Shakespearean epics. Coppola transformed crime stories into art, using the Mafia as a metaphor for America itself, a nation built on family, business, and blood. But the movie's impact went far beyond storytelling. It rewrote the rules of filmmaking. Its visual style, Gordon Willis's dark, moody lighting, became the new cinematic language of realism. Its slow pacing, operatic music, and moral ambiguity opened the door for the New Hollywood movement, inspiring directors like Scorsese, De Palma, and Spielberg to push boundaries. Even the studio system changed. Paramount, which had nearly fired Coppola multiple times, suddenly found itself with the most profitable movie in its history. The same executives who had mocked the too dark, too slow film were now demanding a sequel. And that sequel, The Godfather Part 2, went on to win the Oscar for Best Picture, making the franchise the first in history to win the award twice. Together, the two films became the gold standard of American cinema, studied in film schools around the world. But The Godfather's influence didn't stop at Hollywood. It shaped fashion, music, politics, and even language. Italian-American culture became mainstream, and terms like Don, consigliere, and offer you can't refuse entered everyday speech. Even real-life criminals began quoting the film, dressing like the Corleones and using its dialogue as code. life began imitating art in ways no one predicted. In 1990, The Godfather was added to the U.S. National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. Decades later, it still appears on every greatest movies of all time list. AFI ranked it number 2, right behind Citizen Kane, and some argue it should be number 1. Al Pacino once said, "Before The Godfather, I was just a stage actor. After it, I was part of history." That sentiment applies to everyone involved. The film made legends out of its entire cast: Pacino, Brando, James Caan, Robert Duvall, Diane Keaton, and cemented Francis Ford Coppola as one of the greatest directors who ever lived. Even today, The Godfather remains the standard by which all crime dramas are judged. Every new series, from The Sopranos to Breaking Bad, owes something to it. Its DNA runs through every story about loyalty, power, and corruption. Coppola once reflected, "It wasn't just a movie about the Mafia. It was a movie about fathers and sons, about power and its cost. That's why it will always endure." And endure it has. 50 years later, audiences still watch it not just to be entertained, but to understand something deeper about ambition, morality, and the darkness that hides within family love. The Godfather didn't just tell a story, it built a myth. And that myth became America's own reflection: grand, ruthless, and unforgettable. When you look back at the 10 most fascinating facts about The Godfather, you realize that every piece of its legend, every fight, every improvisation, every risk, was a miracle of timing and conviction. Coppola, the cast, and the crew fought against the odds, against studios, against fear itself, to make a film that wasn't just successful, it was eternal. From Pacino's defiant rise to Brando's ghostly presence, from the real horsehead to the improvised cannoli. The Godfather became something rare, a perfect storm of art, chaos, and destiny. It wasn't simply made, it was forged, like a family empire built on blood, loyalty, and genius. As audiences, we are not just watching the Corleones, we'd be watching America as soul on screen. Beautiful, corrupt, and always chasing its own version of respect. And that's why, half a century later, the world still bows to The Godfather. If you like this video, don't forget to hit like and share to spread it further. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss more deep dives into cinema's greatest masterpieces. Join our community for exclusive content, behind-the-scenes stories, and hidden details from Hollywood's golden era. And if you'd like to support us directly, hit the Super Thanks button below. Your contribution helps us keep uncovering the secrets behind the world's most iconic films. Thanks for watching, and remember, never go against the family.